Hi, this is Commander Griffin. I'm here to show you how to study for instrument flying in primary. Now, our instrument training goals are these. In the contact stage, you learned how to fly the aircraft, and in aerobatics, you learned how to have fun with the airplane. Now it's time for us to show you how to fly in marginal weather. In order to do that, though, I'm going to show you an easy way to flight plan, and I'm going to help you communicate in a multi-plane environment. So what can you expect of the syllabus? Well, in the RI stage, you're going to go to the sims. And in the sims, you're going to learn to procedurally how to fly. And you guys are going to be pretty good at flying a VOR and flying an ILS and a PAR and those things. And the advantages of the sims are these. They're canned. In other words, it makes it easier for you to learn your procedures in a safe environment because you know what to expect. The weather is what the instructor can make it, and it's easy for the instructor to stop the plane in mid-flight to explain concepts without you having to worry about flying the plane. But there are some disadvantages to the sims as well, and that is they are also canned. You know what to expect, and you can chair fly or walk fly the sim prior to going for grade. And you know also that when the instructor is speaking to you, when he simulates playing ATC, you know it's only you, and you know to answer back to him. And this is actually not the case when you're talking to ATC in a true multi-plane environment, which is what we fly in. So in the RI phase, you're going to know your procedures from the sims, but you're really not going to have very good communications. As you continue along in this course, I'm going to show you how to greatly simplify your communications where it becomes much easier. But before we can do that, I need to show you how to do some really quick flight planning. The kind of flight planning you're going to do on the road in the cross-country phase, but it also is going to help you for every flight you do while you're at home. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to take you to skyvector.com. And when you go to Skyvector, you're going to look up on the left-hand side, and you're going to see this word that says Flight Plan. We're going to click on that, and we're going to depart from Whiting Field today, so we're going to hit KNSE in the departure box. And we're going to go to Troy Airport to do some PARs, so KTOI. As soon as I hit that and I click in this white box, you'll notice that the magenta line shows up here that takes you directly from Whiting Field up to Troy in the very top. Now, when you work in this, I recommend you work in the world low and not in the en routes, L22 and stuff of that nature. That way you can see everything you're doing. Now, for this route of flight today, I would need to have a point-to-point. And the first point-to-point I want to do is to a place. I'm going to scroll this in a little bit to Romek. In order to go to Romek, I could type in Romek, R-O-M-E-K over here, or I can just take this magenta line, drag it up to Romek. Skyvector naturally pulls it up, and I'm going to plan for Romek. Now I want to take Victor 115 to the north here up to Pygon. So I'm going to drag the line over to Pygon, hit plan, and I want to also go to chaff on the Victor 115, and I'll hit chaff and plan. Now, as you can see, I've done all this up to Victor 115, and it's going to take me right to Troy. Well, that's all great, but wouldn't it be nice to have a jet log already filled out for you? Well, Skyvector is going to do that for you too. And it's going to do that by this. Let's put in our airspeed we expect to go up there at, and we'll just do 210 knots. And our altitude, if you look in the in-flight guide, you'll see that we actually have a stereo route to Troy, and it's to 11,000 feet. So I'm going to put 110 in here. I click off of that, and by doing so, I now can hit Navlog and watch what happens. Skyvector is going to create your jet log. Now notice I didn't put a time in, but it doesn't matter. It's going to give me my time and route. So this is each time for the leg. Whiting Field at the top of the climb. It says it's going to take 8.5 minutes. Definitely not in our airplane, but Skyvector doesn't really know the T6 very well. But it does say to Romek is going to take us about 12 minutes from Whiting Field. That's if we go direct, of course. And it tells us it's going to take us a total of 29 minutes here to get to Troy. Well, guess what? We can do that for our flight planning stage, which is what we're getting ready to do next. So now you have your general route of flight, what you can expect. You can see that route of flight. Hey, here's my point-to-point to Romek. Here's my general direction, everything I'm going to go to get up to Troy. and you now have a nav log that you can use for your jet log. And notice that it's in each of these times it says 8.5 minutes. Well, every 0.1 of a minute is 6 seconds, so 8.5 is 5 times 6, 30 seconds. So just kind of keep that in mind. It's almost down to minutes and seconds. Okay, so let's go back and let's look at our next portion of what we're doing, and that is we need to start flight planning. So we've already done the flight plan portion of it, and how do we go ahead and put this in the air traffic control system? And we're going to do that by using a DD-175. And you've probably already been taught about this, but let me kind of give you a little bit more detail. The DD-175 is simply one form that lets us file multiple IFR flight plans in each different line we use. Well, guess what? We really don't need you to know how to do it, because we're expecting you to go online and look up Chapter 4 via Google. And when you do this, you really need to look up terminal area delays for practice approaches. Now, as you do this, I want you to notice something down here. These are two separate flight plans. This is Instrument Flight Plan 1. This is Instrument Flight Plan 2. In the first instrument flight plan, these guys are taking off from LSF, which is Lawson Army Airfield. They're going to go to Eufaula via Wiregrass, Victor 578 to IFM to Valdosta. It's going to take them an hour and a half. But watch what they do once they get to Valdosta here. They didn't put it in the 2 line because it's not their last flight plan. They're saying, hey, we're going to Valdosta, and remark delay for 30 minutes. They're going to delay at Valdosta for 30 minutes. And then they say their final destination is back at Lawson Army Airfield. So now they're at Valdosta, they're delaying at Valdosta, so their appointed departure on the next IFR flight plan is departing from Valdosta. They're going to take their route back all the way to Lump, which is an initial approach fix to Lawson Army Airfield. So the big thing to check is, I'm at Valdosta, I went to Valdosta, I'm delaying at Valdosta for approaches, and I'm departing Valdosta. That's going to help you with that. In doing so, I now want you to look at your altitudes, your in-flight guide. If there's stereo routes to it, that'll help you to plan the actual altitude you need to go. And of course, use SkyVector for your nav log. Okay, that's all great. We've planned the flight. We've done our sims. Now it's really time to start getting ready for the true flight portion. And that is, you kind of need to know what to expect when you start flying with us in the airplane. So what can you expect? Well, let's talk about it. Let's look at Mobile downtown. This is in your Alabama approach plates, and we're going to look at the ILS runway 32 at Mobile downtown. Now, I want you to notice that all instrument approach plates are facing to the north. And so you kind of got to get used to looking at this. So I've got a couple questions for you, and I want you to pause the video after I ask a question, answer the question, and then of course start the video back up and see if you got the right answer. Well, this is kind of easy. So I got a question for you, and that is, what heading do you think north is? Now, if you answered 360, that's absolutely correct, and it's pretty easy, right? So what about east? 090. What heading is south then? 180. And what heading is west? 270. Now, I'd have a question for you that's a little bit more complicated, and that is, what heading then is northeast? If you answered 045, that's correct. That's pretty easy, right? Now, what heading is southeast? 135. What heading is southwest? 225. And of course, what heading is northwest? And of course, it's 315. So now that you have a general idea of what these headings are, we're going to incorporate that into what we can expect. So when you're talking about or thinking about what headings and altitudes can you expect, I'm going to ask you to screen your calls, because like I said, in sims you know how to fly the procedures, you know how to fly the approach, but now you've got a lot of other radio chatter going on, you got other call signs, and the controller's talking really fast because there's so much traffic out there. Well, there's really only 3 things you really need to know when you're flying the airplane, and that is, what is your heading, what altitude are you expected to climb to or fly, and then what are you cleared to do? Now we're going to go over this in detail. I want you to look at this approach, keep this approach played out, because on the next screen I'm going to simplify this down and we're going to talk about this in more detail. So let's look at this. We already know our general headings. Now when ATC talks to you, they're not going to say, hey, turn to 315 or 125 or any of these 5 numbers unless it's a PAR. They're always going to end in 0. So your northwest is not going to be a 040 or 045. It's going to be probably a 040-ish. Now why do I say ish? Because it could be 030, it could be 050, could be anything. But if it's around 040, well, it's good enough for government work. And so that southeasterly direction, instead of being that 135, we'll say 130-ish. It's always going to end in a 0. Southwest 230 and northwest 320. So let's take a look at this runway that we had. The ILS runway 32. It's going to go to runway 32 at Mobile downtown. So I got a question for you. Looking at that approach, what is going to be your downwind heading, do you think? And then also, too, what altitude are you expecting to be? So, stop the video right now. What is your downwind heading, and what is your what is altitude can you expect? Now, if you answered a heading of 140, you're correct. Now, it could be 130 and it could be 150, but you notice generally a downwind, right? But what about the altitude? If you said anywhere at 1700 or above, and if you look in that profile view of your chart, you can see that the answers are already there for you. You know the final approach course, and now you can expect I'm going to at least be at 1700 feet. Most of the time ATC is like, climb the 2000. It's just easier to say than 1700, but he might say 1700. So the next question is, what do you think your base leg heading is going to be? If you said heading 230 or 220 or 240, hey, you're on the mark. Now, generally, it's never going to be a square pattern for your ILS or your localizers or even your PARs. They're always going to give you a dog leg to final. Now, your dog leg, I'm sorry to mention that your base leg here, it's almost always a 90-degree angle from your final approach course. So, your dog leg to final. Let's take a look at that. What general heading do you think that would be? If you said 270, you're correct. I want you to notice something here, that almost all dog leg to finals will be anywhere from 30 to 40 degrees from your final approach course. That's because it's just like an on-ramp on an interstate. The air traffic controller is trying to make an easy transition for you so the CDI doesn't swing so hard. It's a nice gradual approach because he's going to tell you how to do that. Now, he has to get you on final, but here's the next question for you. And how far out do you think he needs to get you? Well, take a look at your approach plate. You'll notice that most ILSs or PARs and localizers, they're going to give you a 5-mile final, approximately. Now, you'll see here, this looks like 7 DME, but then you'll notice your missed approach points is about 1.8, 2.6. 1.8 is the actual missed approach point for the localizer. Well, if you look at that, 1.8 would be like 1.9 minus 6.9. That's about 5 miles, and that's normal. So if you have to be riding the glide slope at 5 miles, that means the air traffic control is going to give you at least 3 to 5 miles to be ready to ride this glide slope down. So you're looking at anywhere from an 8 to 10 mile final for that dog leg to final to get you on final. And you can expect that. Okay. Now, I'm going to have some questions for you, and I'm going to have you apply this approach. I'm going to play ATC, and you're going to play yourself. Now, you kind of already have the answers, but I want you to answer back some questions to me, and I want you to pause at each one and answer them. And we're going to use that heading altitude clearance script that you see up here. And all I want you to do is screen for your heading and screen for your altitude, and then screen for the clearance and then read back that clearance. So here we go. Today we're going to be red knight 123. So red knight 123, mobile approach, turn right heading of 140, climb maintain 1,700. Okay. Red Knight 123, turn right heading 230. Red Knight 123, turn right heading 270, maintain 1,700 till established, clear for the ILS runway 32 approach Mobile downtown. Okay, so how would I read back those clearances? Pretty much, I don't say the turn right, turn left, and all this stuff that ATC says. That's not really important. What I say is this. If he says Red Knight 123, turn right heading 140, climb maintain 2,000, I say 140, 2,000, and then I say my call sign last, Red Knight 123. Now that's not quite out of the FTI, but it does make your flying easier. And if you remember, you aviate, navigate, and communicate. Communicate's at the bottom of that whole priority list. So I get my heading out, I get my altitude out, and then I read my call sign because that's easier for me to do. It's a technique, it's not a requirement, but it's one I've found to be very effective, not just for me, but for all my students. So let's talk about the next heading. Red Knight 123, turn right heading 230. My response, 230, Red Knight 123. Now listen to the next one. Red Knight 123, turn right heading 270, maintain 1,700 till established, clear for the ILS runway 32 approach at Mobile downtown. Woo, isn't that a lot of stuff? But all you really have to say is this. 270, 1,700, cleared approach, Red Knight 123. Now, why didn't I read back all that other crazy garbage, the ILS, 32, cleared to blah, blah, blah? Because I'm not required to as the pilot. The air traffic controller legally has to read me the approach I have to shoot. But in your airplane, you've already got that approach dialed up. All you have to say is 270, 1,700, cleared approach. And the neat thing about doing it this way is this. You get to get back to flying the airplane. Remember, aviation is more important. Navigating is more important than communicating. And you told ATC really quick, hey, here's my heading, here's my altitude, I'm clear the approach, and now you can get back to doing what you need to do. Any questions on that? All right. Believe it or not, if you do this, and I recommend, highly, highly recommend that you don't just look at these, but you need to do something else, and that is walk fly these approaches. Now, walk flying is much different than chair flying, because when you're in a plane, you're sitting in a chair, right? But is the plane sitting in a chair? I'm sure you can agree that a plane is always moving forward in time and space. So what you need to do is you need to put a belt on the ground or put a VOR, put anything on the ground that simulates what you can expect from the air, because unlike when you're in a sim or unlike when you're in a plane, you can't get the God's eye view of what's happening. But you can when you walk fly. So when you walk fly, you're putting yourself in time and space, in motion, and you're making those decisions in time and space just the same way you're doing as in the airplane. Now, when you're also walk flying and you have your instrument approach out, play air traffic control and play yourself. Just how I read these comm calls to you, that's the same way air traffic control is going to do for you as well. They're going to read you headings, and they're going to read you altitude, and they're read you clearances, and they're almost always in that same order. They're always going to read heading first, then altitude, and then what are you cleared to do? And that's only for clearing you in an approach or clearing you into hold or something. So, you have the formula. Now, what headings and altitudes can you expect? Walk flies those approaches. And when you do it, do one last thing, and that is do everything with your hands the same way you would do it in the airplane. That way you're creating the habit pattern. So as soon as the landing gear goes down, you start kicking out the landing checklist. That way you won't miss it. So if you have to change altitudes, if you have to do a PAR, any number of things, do it the same way. Okay. So I've probably beat the dead horse here on how to walk fly, what to expect. Your situation awareness is going to improve, and you're going to get the God's eye view that you can't get in the sim, and you can't get by sitting in a chair and chair flying it. And it's going to do wonders for your situational awareness. And oh, by the way, once you start doing this heading altitude clearance thing, you're now going to know what other people are doing outside of your airplane. You might need to know you need to slow down or speed up on downwind or whatever. And that gives you great situational awareness. Let's talk about one other thing, and that's VOR approaches. VOR approaches are actually the toughest approaches you're going to do, because once you kind of get the idea that there's a basic box pattern with a dog leg to the ILS, it's pretty easy. So let's take a look at this VOR approach at Dothan Regional, and this has got a lot of gotchas on it. So let's first of all look at the final approach fix. Now you remember on the ILS we had about 5 miles in that final approach fix. Take a look at this one in Alabama here. It's only about 1.8 miles from the final approach fix to the missed approach point. Now on an ILS, a 5-mile final is going to be about 1,500 feet AGL above the runway. So that means for every mile you're losing 300 feet. Well, let's take a look at this one here. You're at 2 miles and you're 1,000 feet above the runway. So as you cross this VOR, you've got a pretty steep descent if you see the runway when you get to your MDA of 860 and only 2 miles. So take a look at this as well. The missed approach point on this approach is right at the end of the runway. It shows you right here. The missed approach point's right at the end of the runway. And there it is again. It shows you where this approach dumps you out right at the end of the runway. So if you're at 860 feet and it's a 400-foot elevation, you've got 450 feet to try to make a dive just to hit this approach if you saw this at the last minute. VORs are difficult because they don't play to the 5-mile, 1,500 feet model that an ILS or PAR plays to. So watch out for that. Where's the missed approach point and how fast may you have to maneuver or think about? Also, DME may tick up or tick down. I'm going to have some homework at the end of this class that I recommend you look at some different approaches and think about what to do. Now, hey, that's all great for the final approach fix, but there's some other gotchas on this approach. Let's take a look at this arc here. You'll notice an IVGIF here to the final approach course. So IVGIF's on the 230 radial, and then you've of course got your final approach course of 335 or a 155 radial inbound. So let's simplify the math here a little bit. Instead of saying 155, let's make it a 150. So the difference between the 150 degree radial and a 230 degree radial is about 80 radials, right? And we know we're on a 10-mile arc. So if we're doing a 60-to-1 rule, we know that there's 6 radials at the 10-mile arc. So, got a question for you. How many miles would you be flying this arc? Now, we can geek out and spend here all day, but it's about 13-ish, right? We're here in the government. We don't have to be perfect, but it's a little over 13 miles. Wow, that's all day to fly that arc, right? Let's take a look at this other one, though. IVCOB. IVCOB's in the 126 radial and the 155. Let's make it the 125 radial to the 155. So that's 30 radials, right? And we know there's 6 radials per nautical mile. So again, how long is this arc? This arc's only 5 miles. Like, all right, whatever, man. 5 miles, who cares, right? But I got a question for you. If you are flying at 180 knots, right? How many miles are you going a minute? Well, at 180 knots divided by 60 is 3 miles a minute. So at 120 knots, what are you flying? Well, you're flying 2 miles a minute. So then at 150 knots, which is the airspeed we arc at, how many miles a minute are we going? The answer is 2.5. So if I'm going at 2.5 miles a minute, and my arc's only 5 miles here, you're telling me that I've got to lead the radial onto the arc, and then not even 2 minutes later lead it off. So I just get on the arc just to get off the arc, just to get on the final approach course. Oh, by the way, to get configured, oh, to hit this final approach fix, which, oh, by the way, happens to be 2 miles from the runway. And oh, man, you get my point? The point is this. These VORs have a lot of different gotchas on them. So, walk fly these VORs. You're going to start seeing the really weird gotchas that these VORs can do for you. And they can quite get you. And by walk flying, again, you're going to get the God's eye view, and you're going to start getting the idea of really what's happening to you in the airplane. Okay, great. So you're going to walk fly them, you're going to do all that stuff. It's going to make you a wonderful pilot. It's going to have you really have your situational awareness go through the roof. Now you know what to expect from ATC. But there's one more thing I want to discuss with you about VORs, and that is this. Notice this is a VOR alpha approach. That means that this approach is not leading you straight to a runway. It's expecting you to circle. In other words, when you see a letter on an approach plate, it is a circling approach. Well, I got a question for you. Let's say we're shooting a VOR alpha, and then the tower tells us to circle southwest of the runway. So again, we're just blowing up this screen over here, and you can see that this is where it's dumping me in. So given this little carrot here, where is southwest of the runway for runway 14? Well, it's here. So as you walk, fly your approaches, be prepared for, hey, circle southwest. Well, that means enter a right downwind for runway 14. Notice you turned left, but remember, the right downwind means what direction you're going to have to turn to get to your runway. And sure enough, I enter my right downwind to come in for 14. What if they said circle north or northeast for a runway 14? Well, that would mean you'd have to cross over the field and enter a left downwind for runway 14. Okay. What about circle east for runway 32? Well, you're going to have to break off for a little bit of a base leg to enter 32. What if they say circle east for runway 18? Again, there's east, circle 18, and of course, circle for runway 36. Of course, it's pretty much almost a straight in, a slight right for 36. So as you walk, fly your approaches, play tower and play yourself. In other words, have and then come from all different kinds of directions and think, how am I going to maneuver for this runway? So I got one more question for you, and it is, we know that the circling altitude is 860 feet. So I got a question for you. If you're flying the normal contact T6 landing pattern, right? Because a circling maneuver is nothing more than contacts at a lower altitude. In other words, we're not flying any instruments once we get visual on the field. So if my field elevation here is 401 feet, what would my contact pattern altitude be? And if you answered 1,200 feet, that's correct, because you would take your 400-foot elevation plus your AGL altitude for a pattern, which is 800 feet, and that'd be 1,200. But look at my circling altitude. It's at 860. So my next question is where would the 90 be on this approach? Well, if you said half the pattern altitude, and if you said 1,200 divided by 2 is 600, you're telling me that the 90 is only 200 feet from there? Well, that can't be correct. So I don't like saying 200 feet. I don't like saying half the pattern altitude because you guys always forget, and it's not just you, it's everybody forgets that the field elevation. Use 450 feet AGL. So 450 plus 400 is 850. Wait a minute, 850? That's about the same as our circling altitude here of 860. So pretty much you will never go wrong if you do not start your descent for the runway on a circling approach until you hit your 90 every time, your base leg. So most people, they want to try to start their descent at the 180. Don't do that. Wait till you get to your 90. It is what you're set up to do. A circling approach is designed to where you fly that altitude until you can make a normal landing to the runway. And that's the way it's designed. All right, VOR approaches. Now, let's talk about something else. Something you guys probably struggle with, and that is holding. So let's talk about how to make holding easy. So let's look at the Crestview VOR Alpha approach, and that's in the Florida approach plates, by the way. So you'll notice, hey, we've got the holding is depicted as the 106 inbound, 286 outbound heading, and of course the 286 outbound radial off of the Crestview. And let's imagine we came in from Romick or ITU from the north, and here we are. So I got a question for you. Using that method that you learned, this is a non-standard holding, it's to the left side, what kind of entry are you going to make? Is it going to be parallel? Is it going to be direct? Is it going to be teardrop? Well, I'm pretty sure if we were coming down from here, sure, that would be a teardrop. And if we were coming from this direction or this direction, it'd be easily a direct. But what about here? I mean, you're kind of right on the line. Could you do a direct entry? Could you do a parallel? Well, let's make life easier. What if we did a parallel entry? In other words, look at where you are. You're coming down here. Would it be easier for you to kind of just bang a right and hit that 286 heading? Or would it be easier for you to do this left turn here and go back out? Now, the reason why I'm asking this question is this, is what's going to be easier for you at the end? Is it going to be easier for me to do a parallel to kind of come back inbound on my course so I can start getting my triple drift correction and start getting things set up? Or is it going to be easier for me to do a tail radial turn, do all this funky stuff, get back here and get on that? Yes, you can do this method, and it's legitimate. Or you can just look at where you're coming and say, you know what, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. By walk flying your approaches, you're going to kind of probably start saying, hey, you know what, this looks like the better method for entering into a hold. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about this specific hold. Here we are, we got our holding at Crestview. Now I want you to imagine we have a wind out of the southwest here. And it's probably like 30 knots, which by the way in the wintertime is not uncommon. So you're driving yourself inbound and you have this 10-degree crab into the radial. Now you got your CDI all set up. You've got a 10-degree crab into it. Now how do you know it's a 10-degree? Well, take a look. You're going to look at this orange caret and you're going to look at your heading, and if your CDI is centered up, it's going to say, hey, I've got a 10-degree crab. So how do you know what your drift into the radial is? It's based pretty much off your orange caret and what is your heading to keep that CDI centered. Now it's important to keep the CDI centered. So what's your answer? Well, we know with triple drift, we're going to triple that drift into the wind on the outbound leg. And it's going to look something like this. As I turn away from the station here, the wind, I'm no longer drifting into the wind to maintain my course, so the wind is going to push me way out here. And that's why we have that triple drift into the wind, as you can see. So when we come back into the station, we'll be right on our course inbound. So, long story short, just make it easy on yourself. Center up the CDI after you made your entry, and then find your drift. And notice you want to put that orange caret right over that centered CDI. Don't put your heading on it because then the CDI is going to drift left or right. Put the orange caret over it, and that'll help you there. Okay, so I wanted to show you the real ground track because the FTI doesn't show you the ground track of what actually happens. But this is what it really looks like. If you have, in a sense, an undershooting, it's going to undershoot you from coming back in. Let's look at the other direction though. Here we have a wind out of the northwest. Now again, we're drifting into that, we're crabbing into the wind 10 degrees on this particular course here. Disregard the heading numbers to maintain that. So what is this going to look like when we turn outbound? What's going to look like this? The wind is pushing us back towards the course. So notice we have a 30-degree cut into that wind there. And then as we start turning back to the course, the wind's going to help push us back to course. And that's what your actual ground track is going to look like. So I've got some homework for you here. And I want you to look at a number of different approaches. Part of your homework is this. I want you to use Sky Vector to flight plan. It really makes your life easy. And by the way, it's going to make your life easy on a cross country. You can quickly flight plan. You can do changes. But when you flight plan, if you're training out of Whiting Field, I want you to plan an east, west, and north route, especially in the wintertime. Get an idea of what the weather's going to do, because obviously you don't know if it's going to change. And then as you plan them, fly some approaches in those different directions. And then, of course, ask your instructor the night before, hey, where do you want to go? Do you have any alternate routes? Now, for you guys at Corpus, right, we understand you're not going to go east out into the ocean the same way that the guys at Whiting aren't going to go south into the Gulf. So plan a south, west, and north route. So that way, again, walk fly the different approaches you guys will have and do that. And the big thing is screen your calls. Remember, heading, altitude, and clearance. What can you expect from ATC based on where you are? Now, as part of your planning, I would ask you to do something called approach plate roulette. In other words, yes, you plan for these trips, you plan for these flights, but weather has a say in it. So, walk fly multiple different approaches, and when you do that, ask yourself what headings and altitude you can expect, and then do those approaches from multiple directions all over the place. That way, when something all of a sudden comes up, you've already seen it. You've already seen the different stuff. Remember on those VORs, the big thing you need to ask yourself, and here's a VOR 14 Mobile downtown, is where's the initial approach fix? And then, of course, once you know where that approach fix is, how do you get there? Now, I got to tell you, I've had a lot of students say the initial approach fix is here at Brookley VOR, but it's not. And by the way, this is in Alabama. Actually, the initial approach fix is at Guerin, and Guerin is identified as the 6 DME fix on the 310 radial. So, if you walk fly this approach, you got to do a point-to-point just to get to Guerin, just to shoot the procedure turn to intercept that 313 course inbound. And of course, your final approach fix now is, it's about 5 miles, 6 if you say Guerin, but it's about 5 from the field. Wow, that's pretty fun. So what do you do once you get to these different things? What do I do here? And I got a question, how many 6Ts are on this approach? Well, I'll tell you there's 4. There's one at Guerin, one for the turn outbound, one for the turn inbound and intercept the course, and then one at the final approach fix. If you look at the VOR runway 32 at Mobile downtown, there's less and you need to figure out where's your missed approach point, and that's the next thing. Where's the final approach fix? What are you going to do once you get there? Of course, with VOR approaches, how are you going to circle? I want you to practice different circlings from different directions, from the north, the south, the east, and the west, whatever it says. They may tell you to circle northeast, southwest. By the way, let your logic tell you what you think you need to do, because your logic is correct. If you think ATC would set you up for the approach, well, guess what? That's pretty much what they're going to do. Also, too, what climb outs headings do you expect to go if you go missed? Now, believe it or not, these are normally not the published missed approach headings. And the reason why is a missed approach is probably going to have you climb to some VOR and hold. But honestly, ATC, they know you're going to do another approach. They know you're going to do something else. So what would be the easiest heading and altitude for them to give you to do another approach? So let's just say I did this missed off of the VOR 14. Well, Mobile's over here. They're probably going to turn me away from the field, so they're probably going to give me a 040 heading outbound to probably 1,800 or 2,000 feet. Then they're going to give me a downwind of like a 310 to a base leg of, I don't know, what is that, 230 to a dog leg to final 180 to intercept the final approach course. So think about your climb out instructions. What initial heading and altitude can I expect? Pretty much when you hear those climb out altitudes, it's going to be that. Your heading and altitude is going to be what you can expect. Again, let your logic dictate. Well, it's been a pleasure teaching you this course. It's been a lot in a short period of time. I've absolutely had a pleasure here at Whiting Field teaching all my students here, and I hope you guys who get online and read this utilize it. If there's the things that I recommend you highly do, it's walk fly. Don't discount walk flying. Believe me. It is going to pay you such big dividends. And as you do it, play air traffic control and play yourself. And again, move your hands the same way you would do in the airplane. By doing this, you're going to create the habits, which creates reactions, and it reduces the amount of thought you need to put into the aircraft and flying it. And the less you think, the better you're going to fly. Good luck, God bless, and we'll see you guys out there. Take care.